the podcast. This is season 12, and we are interviewing and meeting amazing women from Israel. Today, I have the privilege and honor to get to know Avigayil. She's going to introduce herself in a second. Let me just say where I've connected with her. I happen to know Avigayil's brother, and I happened to be walking in the supermarket, a week ago, and I was talking to her brother and her sister-in-law, and I was just saying, "Oh, I'm recording my new podcast season. Like, you have to interview Avigayil. You have to." And I'm like, "Okay," and it just fit into what this season is all about: hearing from women in Israel, their story, and their story very much touches each of our story. So, Avigayil, without further ado, could you just give us an intro of who you are, where you grew up, where are you located now, and let's start with what was your life like before October 7th? Let's start with that.
Sounds like a plan. Well, I guess I'll start with saying that I'm Sonny Perlman's sister. And yeah, Elise. So I grew up in Far Rockaway. My maiden name is Perlman. I've got 5 brothers and 2 sisters. Luckiest woman alive. I met my husband when I was 23 after dating most of New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. And my husband and I made aliyah 2 days after we got married and launched our ADHD journey. We lived in Moscow for a couple of years, and thank God I have got 6 remarkable children and a grandson.
Oh,
And
that's
so before October 7th, I was a mom, a special educator, a public speaker. My main focus of my work is ADHD. I'm an author. I published 2 books. One of them became an Amazon bestseller, which was super amazing. And Sonia and Ellie helped me out with that, putting the word out there about my book. And so I was really busy with teaching my students. I have my own clinic, and I was really very, very immersed in this topic and loving it, seeing a tremendous amount of success, and loving living here in Israel. It's really, I have 2 sons who are soldiers, combat soldiers, and a son-in-law. And
wow.
we're really very much part of the fabric of Israeli society. We both learned Hebrew. I teach in Hebrew. My husband works in Hebrew as well. And we lived in Moscow for a couple of years. So we learned Russian, taught in Russian, and it's been a very full, colorful life. I couldn't have imagined that life would even take on more intensity after October 7th.
Also, before we even get into that intensity after October 7th, I'd love to get let's backtrack a little bit from when your younger years, because here you're an author, you have your own clinic. Like you said, 2 days after your wedding, off to Israel. What was it like? What was Avigayil like when she was a young girl? Were these dreams and aspirations that you had? Like, were you always dreaming about being a writer? Did you always dream about living in Israel? Like, where did this all come from?
So the one thing I never dreamed was being a writer. And I never, ever got over a C in high school English class. And I later bumped into my high school English teacher who taught me for 4 years. And I happened to mention to her that I was a teacher and that I had written a book, and she burst out laughing. So no writing. I did not dream of being a teacher either. I think God just kind of sent me in that direction. I was not a good student. I didn't like school. I liked social. I love my friends. And I loved getting out and socializing. I was definitely not shy, not quiet. I loved to have fun. Growing up in my home, my parents got divorced when I was 11. There's 8 of us, as I said before. So that was in itself like a real package. We were dealing with a lot as kids. And, I think that, the blessings and the challenges of that, we definitely today are very close with each other. And that's really very, very fortunate. And it doesn't always turn out that way. But that journey was definitely what informed the way I live my life now. I think I probably was a cute kid. I don't remember being a cute kid, but I think I was. I was always laid back, and I know that because my mother had told me the story that when I was a little girl, maybe 2nd grade, she was called in for the parent teacher meeting. So she agreed to go, despite knowing she probably wouldn't get a great report. And the teacher just laid it on. Avigayil's a total mess. She stuffs her papers in her desk, doesn't do anything, forget brushing her teeth. I remember they had like a toothbrushing chart, and like all you had to do was brush your teeth. And I could never get the point. Very like scattered like that. And And so my mother says, well, maybe Avigayil's too stressed out. And she says, you don't understand, Mrs. Perlman. If your daughter was any less stressed out, she'd slip into a coma. Little sliver of a picture.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so there were so many things you touched on. First of all, okay, I didn't know about the parents, so I personally love seeing adult children who went through divorce, because here I am. I also had gone through divorce, and I'm always concerned, what are my children going to look like? You
Mm.
know, how are they going to sail this journey that they're on, the sea of divorce, and here and there and this parent and that parent and going from this home to that home. So thank you so much for having this conversation and meeting somebody who seems to have it all together now. So you're like the light at the end of the tunnel of that divorced child vision. So thank you for that. But now what you're describing, me as someone who was a teacher, I just find it humorous. That's all. Because I've had many students that if you told me how successful they are today, I'd be like, you must be kidding me. Like, I don't even understand how that
You
happened.
would have burst into laughter too had you been my teacher.
Yes, probably I would have. But I've been very proud, though. Definitely would have been very proud that you really probably got it all together. Is it because your focus then went to ADHD because that what was causing your scatterness? Is that what it was? And that's where you decided to take a deep dive into that?
So that's a great question. I don't have ADHD.
Oh,
And
okay.
sitting down and writing my books, despite the fact that it's super challenging and it's like 9 months of pregnancy and birth and delivery and everything else that's involved for publishing books, um, I am very focused. I'm a very focused person. My house is organized. We make appointments. We get to the appointments. My family goes out on trips and we don't leave everything at home. Like we're a put together group over here and I'm leading the ship. So I actually naturally do not have ADHD. And what intrigued me about the ADHD story is that I would have been diagnosed with ADHD. And the reason I would have been diagnosed with ADHD, and I'm glad that it really became kind of exploded the diagnosis and use of stimulant medication in the 1980s. So I'm a little bit older than that. So it kind of missed me. And I'm very grateful for that because the reason I was having these ADHD symptoms was because of the chaos of my home and the upbringing that I was going through. And therefore, it was a traumatic response. And
Mm.
medicating a kid who's having a traumatic response, what you're doing is blaming the child for their challenge and then shutting them down, which today I'm a major advocate for kids who are being diagnosed one after the next with ADHD symptoms, with ADHD, when they're exhibiting these symptoms, but there's a root cause of the symptoms. And we have completely lost curiosity. So that's why I got into it, because I saw my students, I taught in Darchei Torah, I started out in Hawk and then Darchei Torah, and then taught in many schools here in Israel and in Moscow as well. And what I was seeing is that although many children were exhibiting ADHD symptoms, most of them, you could identify a root cause of the symptoms. And if anyone slowed down to just ask why, and if anyone slowed down to ask why, when I was suffering and struggling, I wanted to brush my teeth. I wanted a clean desk. I had no availability to get to that. And if someone said, what's going on with little spaced out Avigayil? Maybe we could help her out here. There was tons of potential. I was not shy. I was happy to speak in front of the class. I loved to sing. I was a gregarious, friendly kid. It was so much that could have been done to kind of walk me through those challenging times and give me the skills I needed. But people weren't curious, and people are still not curious. So that's actually how I got into it.
Wow, I just love that. And I really hope who's ever listening to this will press rewind and re-listen to what you just said, because that was very, very powerful. I think very, very powerful. I really, really, very much so. It really hit me over here as a teacher. It hit me as a mom. It hit me as a grandmother. Um,
Isn't that the
because
best part?
yes, I mean, because it's so true. As when I was teaching in the classroom, and I've taught for 28 years, I was the middle school dean at Yavne Academy. And when I used to say that when the students came into my classroom, I had 25 individuals, and I don't know what just transpired in their home when they woke up in the morning, got ready for school, had breakfast, maybe didn't have breakfast, maybe had a shirt to wear that was clean, maybe they didn't have a shirt. Did they just witness parents arguing? Is there a grandparent in the household that's sick? Do they have a special needs sibling? Is there someone else that's sick in the home? Is the father or mother out of work? Are they having difficulty paying their bills? I mean, I could go on and on and on about all the different, and that's just surrounding them. Then, you go into the little life of the child. Was there a party last night that they weren't invited to? Or were they invited to a party and they were up late? I mean, I could, it's like, it's mind boggling how people are not sensitive to the plight of children and what they're going through and now it's not, but then I think sometimes, and maybe that's my old school brain, I think sometimes then you have the other school of thought where people are so into the plight and then there's no correction or there's no fixing. What do I mean by that? I'll give you my little grandma. I don't know how old your grandchild is, but this is my own little experience. My kids would say, "Oh, so and so's not sleeping through the night, Ima." I'm like, "Oh, okay. Well, what did you do? Like, I don't understand." Well, I discussed with them why they're not sleeping and they're scared. And I said, "Okay, and then what you do next?" "Well, they're scared." I'm like, "Oh, okay." So, I comforted them, but we discussed it. And I'm like, "Are they sleeping through the night now?" "No." So,
That
what'd you say? What'd you say?
I knew the outcome of that one.
Yeah, but you hear where I'm going with that.
I talk about this in my book a ton, and my sense
Yes.
is if you raise your child feeling sorry for them, you'll end up raising a sorry child. This
Oh,
whole idea of the child's fragile and is going to fall apart is just not true. We are so resilient. Our kids are resilient. I took kids from Israel where they were speaking English and Hebrew and stuck them in school in Russia where they gathered another language and then stuck them back in school in Israel. They are not just not worse for the wear, they benefited from it. They gained from it because they have resilience, they're strong, they're capable, and they have two loving parents. I tell parents all the time, you're raising kids who are in the top 1 percentile of children in the world. There is nothing for you to feel sorry about. Even children who come from a divorced home, they have two parents who love them. They have a roof over their head. They have money. They have food. They're not wanting for anything. So let's stop being overly coddling and try to bubble wrap them from the challenges that they need to have anyway in order to grow, just like we grew from our challenges, and be there to guide them instead of shielding them all the time.
wow. Okay, and I love that. I love what you said about could you say one more time the sorry line? That was so good.
Hmm. If we feel sorry for our children, we land up raising sorry children.
Yeah, that was it. That was it. That was beautiful. Beautiful. So that said it all.
Said it
Um,
differently both times, just in case anyone's
okay,
favorite.
but that was good. That was good. But I want to focus on you are going into where we want to weave into right now about resilience. Because I think when COVID happened, this was my take. When COVID happened, it really developed resilient muscles for a lot of our children. I know we call COVID in Israel, it's Corona. I mean, that's how you always could differentiate between
Yes.
people and where they're located. But I definitely saw that it built resilience. There was a big shift. Kids were on Zoom, not in school. Scheduling was off. COVID came and went. And everyone thought life was going to go back. Like
Mm.
life would just go back to the way it was. And, it's interesting how you said that 2 days after you got married, you went off to Israel. So it happens to be, I got married that night, I went to Israel.
Wow.
And yeah, so I had spent, it was we call it our Shana Rishona. So we went to Israel and I had two kids there with me. I was going back and forth. So I wasn't there permanently, but I traveled back and forth also for work. But I was there on October 7th. I was there for Sukkot and I had my children with me. And that was another shift in the world that we live in, especially the Jewish world. So I think COVID started building resilience. And I think when October 7th hit, like you had to like step up. And I know there were a lot of people, I even put out this video. I shared it about this, I think it was a soldier that was saying how, so like my son's teacher, I thought was a teacher, is now X. This one who was by the gas station was really this. The doctor was that. This one, like it was like all these superheroes.
Right.
started coming out. Like it's like, like this famous Superman, Clark Kent versus Superman. Like everyone was living Clark Kent lives as if, and everyone became Superman life. And I know you were no different. And I'd love for you to share with us um, how that transition happened for you, how that all came into play, and to describe it for us if you don't mind.
Okay, so October 7th, obviously, I live in Israel, and my whole household has ADHD. And the booming started at 6:30 in the morning, at least what we could hear. And I heard it right away. Woke up, everyone's dead to the world. And so I said, kind of jabbed my husband, something's going on. I went out to the street to see if I could find somebody who knew what was going on. I bump into a neighbor, and he's like, "Oh, we're just pounding Gaza right now. If only. If only we pounding Gaza. We had our first siren at about 8:15, and we were still joking around because that's what we do here anyway. And I was like, God, we should have a siren every Shabbos morning at that hour. Finally, all my boys are out of bed. And then it just kept going. And they tried to get to shul. They got sent home. We actually had a magnificent Simchat Torah in my front yard. As we all have a safe room in the house. So I figured, if we need to, we'll all just pile into my house. And we had a kiddush. We danced. We got a Torah. All the neighbors came together. And I think that was the post-COVID energy of togetherness that really got us like the resilience of, we're going to fight through this. We're going to make the Chag beautiful anyway. And we did. But as we were doing that, I kind of looked across at my oldest son, Gabriel, who's a big guy. He's a soldier. He just finished his army service. He was in a Sayeret unit, which is an elite unit. And he did a great army service. We were so proud of him. And he was done. And he'd been done only half a year. And I'm looking over at him, and he already had his phone in his hand because of the sirens. And all the soldiers know that they have to do that. And he's picking up messages. And I'm watching this big, proud, handsome Israeli soldier kind of crumble. And I'm like, I walked over, I put my arm on his shoulder, and I said, what's going on? And he says, Ima, it's really bad. Bibi just declared war. We're at war. Hundreds of people are dead. People have been taken hostage into Gaza. The second I heard that, I said, oh my God, it's all over. This is going to be an absolute disaster. And it was. But my married daughter, living in Cholon at the time, I already knew that they were pummeling the center of the country where she lives, and she's 8 months pregnant. So I'm thinking about her all day long. Oh my God, is she okay? Her husband had just gotten out of the army on Sukkot. We made him a kiddush in our sukkah, invited his family, celebrated him finishing his army service. And then October 7th, 3 days later, the war breaks out. And throughout the day, my son had a cast on his arm. He had just fallen off of a motorcycle, which I told him not to ride, but that's a different story. And he had a cast. So I said, listen, you can't go. You can't go to Gaza because you have a cast on your arm. You can't fight that way. And he looks me dead in the eye and he says, Ima, I'm going. And I'm like, okay, looks like I'm backing off. There's no way I'm getting in the way of this focus. He comes down after Shabbat. He says, I need to be in Yerushalayim by 3 a.m. Can you take me? And he had sawed his cast off. And he was ready to go. I called my daughter. She says, Ima, you got to come get us. They just called Ariel. I'm panicked. They can't take him. She's really losing it. And I think about it, and I get very emotional all over again. And so the roads were bare, obviously. Nobody's leaving their houses, terrified. There's sirens round the clock. But it's right after Shabbat, and I say, your daughter calls. What do you do?
Right.
Well, you go. Exactly. We understand each other. So I took my gun out of the safe. I'm not sure what the intention was there. I'm going to shoot the missiles out of the sky. Strapped it on, head out the door. My only real plan was look up in the sky for prayer and for missiles and pedal to the metal and get there and go get your baby. And I did. I got there. They're both crying. The army had called. I mean, she was crying. He was being supportive. You understand. And the army had just called. I had to drop him off at his army base. Horrifying. I dropped them off. I go away because it's their story, not mine. And you and I, as mothers-in-law and grandmothers, understand that we have to have those healthy boundaries there. And I'm weeping in my corner, just knowing what my daughter's going through. She didn't know she would see her husband again. That's how serious this thing was. Dropped him off, came back, put her to bed, brokenhearted, and then took my son out and dropped him in Yerushalayim too. I came back finished. Like there was nothing left of me. I remember I sat down, I wrote a WhatsApp to my siblings, my amazing siblings who are still in Chag. They supported as soon as Chag was over. I wrote them. I actually just dug it up a couple of days ago to reread it, and it got me sobbing again. It put me right back there. And we got to work the next day. We started feeding soldiers and doing things for soldiers. My main work began when I'm part of the cherva kadisha of our area, a volunteer, my husband as well. And the cherva kadisha, the head of our cherva kadisha, Rav Rafi, called and said, listen, we need people to help us bury the bodies. Can you come? Yes, of course we can come. You know, my son's on the front line. My son-in-law went to Hebron. My son went to the border of Gaza. They were about to march him in. So I said, you know, if my son's there, of course we're coming in. We'll do this front line. And we did. And we were terrified going in. We had no idea what was going to hit us. And it turned out to be one of the more empowering and spiritual experience I've ever had in my life. Not something I ever want to do again, ever, ever, ever. But the neshamas there in that room that we had to prepare for burial in states that I'm not going to describe now. I don't think this is the place or time. But the kadisha that we felt in that room, all of us, all the women, we didn't know each other before. We met in the room. We became sisters instantly. But we all felt that we were being lifted up. We were not doing anything for them. These women, these girls, these grandmothers, these sisters, they were doing something for us. There were people my daughter's age, my mother's age, you know, all of Am Yisrael. We were all there. And the building itself was in Rishon LeZion, was also this incredible, powerful unity experience because we had all the Jews, every color, every shape, every size, every orientation. We were all in that building working together, from secular to religious to Hasidish to modern Orthodox. Everyone was there in that building, men and women. And when there was a siren, they were still lobbing rockets at us as we were trying to bury our dead. And this intensity, having to like run into a safe room while you're trying to deal with something that horrific, that heartbreaking. And then we shove into this room and this incredible group of people with a level of faith that I've never encountered in my life. So that was where I began. And now, since then my son calls me after we finished that work. It took about a week to get 85% of the bodies prepared for burial and then buried. Then he calls me, hey, Ma, would you mind getting me a bulletproof vest? And I'm like, yeah, sure, honey. I'm on it. So I was like, okay, what do I do? And I just sent out messages far and wide to all of Am Yisrael. And my sister in South Africa landed up hooking me up with a Rav there. We landed up bringing in hundreds of bulletproof vests and then helmets. And the requests keep coming in. Just now, right before our conversation, we landed up finding someone who could donate 25 helmets to the Haredi unit. And we're still at it because the soldiers don't have what they need. So that's been my story since October 7th.
Wow. So I just want to tell everyone, the cherva kadisha is a group of people. When I've done it, it's always been like 4. There could always be a 5th, right?
We worked in teams of 6.
Okay, teams of 6.
Because it was a much different type of work than a regular purification.
Right. So that's how I wanted to explain. It's getting the bodies ready for burial. And typically it's about cleaning the bodies, preparing them. Where I used to do it, there was no mikvah. I don't know if you had a mikvah on
we
anywhere.
Don't put these bodies in a mikvah.
It's in the mikvah. Oh, because they're kedoshim from, okay, got it. They just go the way they are, right? That's what.
Yeah. Exactly.
Right? They stay in the whatever clothing perhaps they were in. They don't put on what's the special garment, which is called tachrichim. I just want to explain it to everybody so that they understand. So I think and you could correct me because you probably know much better, but from what I was taught was that this way is as if when they get up to Shamayim, to Akash Baruch Hu, it's as if they're the way they died because it's Al Kiddush Hashem, and they're like presenting themselves before HaKadosh Baruch Hu. See, this is me, as opposed to the tachrichim. Is that correct?
So there's actually two reasons that we were told about when we were doing the work. First of all, if we did start washing the body, we'd damage the body. There was no body that was intact. So
Okay.
we would hurt. Our only mission was to make sure that the body was buried as intact as possible without causing harm. But the reasons why we don't need to put them in this tachrichim that you're talking about, and only to wrap them in what's called a misovev, which is this long piece of linen, and basically a very large linen sheet that we wrap them in, a white linen sheet, is because they are already pure. They don't need our help. Their souls are going directly to God, and nothing we could do could make them holier, because we wash a dead person's hands and feet. We're essentially helping them do their last mitzvah on earth. These people don't need our help to do any mitzvahs. They're there already. And the second is really to, like you said, but just adding a little bit to it, it angers God when, to shake up God. It's our conversation with God. When we're burying these people, we're saying, God, look what happened to your children. Look how we're burying them. Look how they're arriving at you. They died al Kiddush Hashem. What are you going to do? That's opening that dialogue, that channel with God while we're doing the work.
Right. Powerful, powerful. Now, also, I just want to ask another question, just out of curiosity, because you brought it up a little bit. I know when people work on the cherva kadisha, you're not allowed to be talking unless you want to talk about something in reference to the mace, the dead body, and preparing it. So because you want to be respectful for the neshama. We believe that the neshamas, and that's what you were saying, all the neshamas that were there, and the sense of kedusha that you were feeling. So if a siren went off, just out of curiosity, if a siren went off and you had said you went into a safe room and you're in a different location, did you remain silent then also in the safe room? You could talk there.
Tell you that all of those rules of talking, not talking, don't apply.
Oh, really?
Which is really surprising. The only talking we did was in reference to the woman or girl who had been killed, and we always used her name. We always made sure to check who she was and speak to her and apologize to her if we caused any kind of damage. We were very careful anyway not to have frivolous conversation in such a room. We wouldn't anyway. It was very natural for us not to. But if the siren did go off, we would cover the body and we'd go to the other room, and then we landed up in a lot of conversation during those sirens.
Wow. Okay. So now that period of time, how long were you working with the cherva kadisha nonstop? How long after October 7th, and for how long a period of time?
So the work only began a week after October 7th, because we know that a lot of the bodies were booby trapped and they were not able to be taken out. And also, as my son also reported from being right there on the southern border, there were terrorists wandering around for days after the attack. So they couldn't even get to the communities. They couldn't get to the houses. So the bodies laid out for a very long time. And then in addition, every single body had to go through forensic testing and DNA testing through Abu Kabir is what it's called in the center of the country. They all had to go through that to make sure that they were properly identified because of the state that they were in. And it wasn't necessarily because of what Hamas did. It was a combination of the absolute cruelty of the way Hamas had destroyed the bodies, but also because they had been out for a full week. So we started the Saturday night after the massacre, one full week later, and our work went on for 1 week, and we worked really round the clock. We had round the clock shifts. Each shift was about 7-8 hours, and then we'd be replaced. And we worked as fast as we possibly could.
How does a person, I'm just asking you, how do you do it? After seeing what you saw, how do you, like, sleeping at night? How do you make that divide in your brain, emotionally, mentally, psychologically? What do you do? What tools do you use, Avigayil, to help you now function after that period of time?
Right. And there's even something more challenging, which is, how do you come home after a day like that to your kids?
Right.
And your kids are worried. We're in the middle of a war. They're in some kind of trauma. You've got a son-in-law and a son on the front lines, different places. Like, how do you pull that together? I used to come home every time with pizza from the cherva kadisha. They would buy us pizza and no one wanted to eat it. So we would just bring it home to the kids. So at least I had dinner for them. But we really had to very consciously make a decision that this was not our children's burden and that we were not going to come home and discuss it with them. I was lucky enough that my husband was doing the same work. Very many people did not have that advantage, but we would get into bed at night and then he would share with me what he saw and I would share with him what I saw. And we would kind of get it off of our chest. And we knew that we couldn't share any of this with anybody else. Like nobody else wanted to hear it or should hear it. I did later give an interview to Caroline Glick where I gave more details than I usually give because it was more of a testimonial, because that was when suddenly we were getting Holocaust denial after October 7th, which blew my mind. So I did land up talking about it a little bit in more detail, but to my children, absolutely not. And I'll tell you, there are two things that really protected me dramatically. And for all of us, all of the Matarot and Matarim, we had like a therapy session afterwards and we did get a chance to talk about it. And I feel like the two things that really helped us, and I think that would help anybody who's going into a situation that can cause trauma. Number one, we weren't like deer in a headlight. We weren't caught with nothing to do. We were being presented with a very traumatic situation, but being invited to do something about it. We were able to be helpful. We were able to move forward. And that's very, very helpful and cathartic for not allowing for trauma to stay with you. And in addition, we also had each other. We were talking to each other a lot about it. And that comes together, that we were able to move forward as a team. And the second thing is that we were able to really know that we were doing this for God. Like the L'Shem Shamayim piece was massive. If you're just suffering because you're suffering, it's very hard to climb out of it. But if you know that you're preparing these bodies as fast as you can and as well as you can, with as much intention as possible, these bodies will be able to be laid to rest and their families will be able to mourn properly and move on, then you're on a mission. And a mission is so important. And I actually saw that with our soldiers as well. I was worried about our soldiers. I actually wrote an article about this recently, how we thought the worst of this generation. They're all phone addicted. They're all self-centered. They're all like, if God forbid something happens, we're doomed. We can't rely on these guys. And it turns out, yes, we can, because it wasn't the phones. It was their lack of purpose. That's what was happening. And we've kind of lost our way in that way. Like we don't have a mission. We don't provide our kids with a mission, which brings us back to the beginning of our conversation. We're so busy bubble wrapping our kids from difficult experiences that we forget that they actually are upstanding citizens of the world and can really accomplish a lot if we just allow them to. And that's what happened to these amazing soldiers.
I love everything you're saying, because so much of it I agree with. I've heard it. Like I said, I was in Israel at different points in time this year, and I also did this program, a Matan program, fellowship, Eshkol fellowship, and we had a trip in Israel, and they took us around and they took us to Rav Benny's yeshiva in the Gush area, and he had lost a son there, and he had said the same exact thing you're saying. And this was in January. He said, we all mocked this generation. And he also gave an example, the phone, this, that we thought they were self-absorbed. He said, this is the generation that's going to shine, that's going to bring us out of it. It's unreal. It's if somebody hasn't experienced going to an army base or meeting with the soldiers, you don't understand to the degree the joy that they feel, because they feel the sense of purpose. They're going there, and I mean, it's just the sense of purpose to correct what's wrong in the world. Their I guess, how would I put it? Their newfound devotion, I think, to God, to Judaism, in whichever way they feel it and show it, is a beautiful thing to see. And I remember it was right around Purim time. I went to a special army base, and they asked me to speak, and I'm like, in Hebrew, like, okay. And that was one thing I had said. I had shared a thought from Rabbi Lau. He had asked the question, why do we say Misha Nichnas Adar Marbin Besimcha? Why do we say that the beginning of Adar, everything changes in Adar in the middle of Adar? On the 15th, the 13th, the 14th, right? We thought we were going to get killed. Esther's fasting. It's sad when Adar, we're on the brink of death when Adar starts, but it says, Misha Nichnas Adar Marbin Besimcha. Whoever enters Adar enters it with joy. This is because we already in the brink of doom, we as the Jewish people are so resilient, we could be joyful. And I said to the soldiers, that's them. I said, they are the epitome of that idea and that concept, that they're going in with joy. It's not just a thank you to them for your service, because it's how they do their service that is so inspiring. That's what we're cut above the rest. It's just unbelievable. So that's why I totally agree with what you were saying, and that article that you referenced, 100%, totally on the mark, on the mark. So now let's go back to, do you feel like, and not that you're going backwards, but now has life a little bit gone to what it was like a little bit, your clinic, your classes, has things a little bit gotten more regulated?
Well, I carried on working throughout. I
Okay.
carried on meeting with people throughout, and because of the families going through a lot of trauma, I meet with parents of children who are struggling with ADHD symptoms. I meet with couples who are struggling with ADHD. So there was just a lot more trauma, and people were needing guidance right away. So even during that week where I was doing cherva kadisha work, like above and below, like, in and out, I was also meeting up with clients. Everything was on Zoom right then because people were just scared to leave their houses. And the rows were just empty. So I carried on working. I teach in Haredi Teachers College here in Israel. I love the work. The semester was pushed off a little bit, but then it started. So in terms of work, things really stayed the same. In terms of our lives, nothing's been the same. My son is going back into Gaza for the third time next week. So, keep him in your prayers, please. Thank you. So, my son-in-law is out now after 4 straight months. They had their baby boy in the middle of his time in Hebron, and they let him out for like a little bit of time for the birth, the bris, and for the pidyon ben, but otherwise he was a soldier. And so what our kids are going through and carrying is remarkable. And also, there hasn't been a day that's gone by that I have not devoted at least a substantial amount of time trying to raise money. Soldiers call me every day and say, my helmet is not bulletproof. And I can't, and I have said to them so many times, speaking about the finest generation ever, I said to them, don't go in. Refuse to go in. If you don't budge, the army will have to provide you with a helmet that works. And they say, really? You think I'm not going to walk in with my fellow soldiers? Not a chance. I'll go in with my substandard helmet. And I'm like, oh no, I'm an Ema. You'll get your helmet before you go in. And we do whatever we can. Like, and round the clock, I'm sending out messages. Please help us. Please donate. And it gets harder and harder and harder. And frankly, I do not blame anyone who's like, I don't want to donate anymore, because shouldn't the IDF have their act together by now? And of course they should, but they don't. So that's why we are very, very focused on like just being there for the soldiers. No politics at all. Just focus on the soldiers. So my life is not the same, and it never will be again. And I think in addition to that, the most challenging thing for me, I'm just making sure that my computer's plugged in. The most challenging for me is that I've 4 of my dear friends have buried sons. We've been to countless funerals. My son lost over 30 friends in this war. And life's never going to be the same again, because just last night I drove past my dear friend Leah, who she's moving on. But no, she's not. She's carrying her sweet Ephraim in her heart wherever she goes, as we all do. But we're broken. We're broken. We're traumatized. And there's a lot of tragedy. But I was just telling a friend who came to visit just the other day, I said, what's remarkable about the Israeli people is that we mourn together and we celebrate together. So we are not the same at all. and we've all been there for each other for mourning. And I actually just wrote something that was put in between carpools about an experience at one of my friend's funeral, a son's funeral, and but we also celebrate together. What I've noticed is that smachot, brit, a bar mitzvah, a wedding, doesn't matter. Any celebration has taken on so much energy and so much meaning. Like you can feel the joy in the air, and we're all in it together. So, yeah, we're never going to be the same again. But is that bad? Is that good? Is that something in the middle? It's all up to Hashem, you know?
Can you share that experience? Do you mind? You referenced it. I would love to hear that experience that you said that you had just recently. Maybe with that we could end, perhaps.
Okay, so I was at my dear friend Sarah. Her son Eli Moshe was killed a couple of weeks ago, and she actually is a friend that I met through a Mother of Soldiers support group, and it hits even harder because we were all there trying to give each other support as our children were deep in Gaza or up north, whatever, in very risky, terrifying situations. And we cried together and we hugged each other and we had faith together. We davened for each other's kids. And then her son fell. And it just broke us, absolutely broke us. So we went as a group to the funeral and it was brutal. It was brutal. She was like, I've never seen a person accept what was going on with so much faith and love, which broke us even more. And as we walked into the funeral, there was a table of volunteers giving out water bottles and tissues. Turns out that after I wrote this article, my friend reached out to me and said, that's my organization. And we felt like we're not doing anything. We're not doing anything. We're just, what are we doing? We're giving out water and tissues. And she landed up, she said, you have no idea how much you've strengthened us through what you wrote. Because I said, I took some tissues, I took a bottle of water and carried on to the funeral, stuck the tissues in my bag. Everybody had tissues, everyone was sharing with each other. I never had to take it out again. But as life is, we have to really capture and live within the highs and the lows. So I went straight from the funeral and was dropped off at my friend's grandson's bris, their first grandchild, and really thrilling. And I know her daughter well, and I love the grandmother and the mother. And I came in there, my eyes were bloodshot. I looked like a disaster, just a mess. And I'm thinking like, God, I'm going to bring down the energy of this bris. It's so joyful. And I say, I walk in and the mother's crying, the grandmother's crying, and the crying is so different. And I'm like, I'm trying to get in it. And then someone turns around and says, the mother needs some tissues. I'm like, tissues, I could do that. And I open my bag and I run over and I give the tissues to the mom. And she smiles at me. And then it just gave me this warm, uplifting feeling. I'm feeling like Eli Moshe is like reaching down, like from his place in Shamayim, and he's like handing these tissues on to the next generation, to the new baby boy that was born. And it was really just very powerful.
Wow, that's so beautiful. And I think the important lesson that everyone could hear from this is that sometimes all it does is take a tissue.
Yeah.
So many of us are still grappling what they could do, how they could help in this situation, or perhaps they have been helping and then they've lost their oomph because it's so long already. It keeps on going. And to know that perhaps if you don't have that oomph anymore, even just a simple tissue to somebody else in need is all that it takes.
Yeah. Yes.
And that's really a beautiful thing. And I want to thank you, Avigayil, for really sharing yourself, sharing the work that you do before and still after, and your wisdom on ADHD and where it could stem from, and then just your service to Klal Yisrael during this crazy time. Because your service is to Klal Yisrael always, because you're helping everybody, but also in the time of war where you just stepped up and really took care of, I guess you took care of the neshamos, and you're taking care of everybody else's goof at the same time. So,
we're all working together. It could only happen because when I reach out to Klal Yisrael, they respond.
Right. Yeah. So beautiful. And thank you to responding to coming on the podcast as well. That's also a big thank you. Thank you so much for your time. And I'm going to wish you a great day and Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you so much.